Thank you, Professor Sharath Menon, and thank you all for your interest. Uh, I'm going to be talking about the antiquity of Indian medical systems. Now, this is a far cry from the three excellent talks that you just heard, where people are talking about the role of meditation and yoga and other such things in the well-being of the human body. Now, I'd like to take to an entirely different topic, which is the antiquity of Indian medical systems. The first speaker did not use any PowerPoint slides. The second speaker said he was going to use but did not. The third speaker used a bit, but mine is heavily on PowerPoint. So I guess our progression is just right over there. So you can look at some of our old works at iHeart channel on YouTube, and we have several of the talks that if this talk is interesting, you might like to follow that. So the outline for my talk today is, I'm going to talk a bit about the sources for Indian medical systems. I'm going to address the antiquity of Indian medical systems. And in particular, I'll also talk about the knowledge transfers of Indian medicine and how they impact world cultures. Just about any culture that you can imagine has been impacted by these systems. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the hermeneutics of Ayurveda, which is the ancient Indian medical system. Surendranath Das Gupta, a very important philosopher who lived in India in the 1930s and so, in 1936, he wrote that medicine is perhaps the most important of physical sciences, which is intimately connected with Samkhya and Vaisheshika physics. He also says that it probably was because of Ayurveda, this is the origin of logical statements encoded in Nyaya Sutras. Now you might wonder what these are. These are the ancient philosophical schools of Hinduism. For example, the Nyaya school of Hinduism was, the aphorisms, if I may call them that, had things like, all knowledge is not intrinsically valid. Most knowledge is not valid unless proven, and truth exists whether the human beings know it or not. These are brilliantly scientific ways of looking at the world, at looking at reality, at what they call the nature of vidya and avidya. To study these things, these are brilliant ways of looking at the world and a way of thinking. Now, if you look at Vaisheshika, it used perception and inference to make sense of the real world, whether it was vidya or avidya, once again using perception and inference. Samkhya was systematic enumeration and rational examination. Once you have your data points, once you have all the evidence in front of you, you systematically enumerate it and then come to a rational examination. So logic and other schools of thought come out of this. So what you see is the hermeneutics of Ayurveda was deeply grounded in these highly scientific ways of looking at knowledge in the ancient world. We don't talk much about these things because there hasn't been a proponent of these thoughts other than in the traditional ashrams that you go to where the gurus teach you these things. It's not taught in our schools or discourses. So we have no idea about these philosophical systems of Hinduism. If you look at Atharva Veda and Ayurveda, all of Ayurveda came from Atharva Veda. If you look at how they looked at disease and ill health, and this is again from Surendranath Das Gupta's book, History of Indian Philosophy, Volume 2. One school says that you look at disease and ill health as due to unwholesome diet. And if it is because of unwholesome diet, then you could use Ayurveda to cure it. But it also looked at disease as due to karma phala and transgressions that the human might have caused. And because of that, you might have to resort to some prayaschitta and Atharva Veda practices to cure it. So in other words, it did not separate it out saying that this is a scientific way of looking at the world and I'm going to remove it from the way that I think. It was deeply embedded with the practices of the land and the way that people thought. There was no dichotomy in the way they were looking at these things. So I'd like to talk about some sources and what I particularly call Western timelines, because I'm going to challenge some of these timelines pretty soon. So Atharva Veda is the source point for most of the Ayurvedic and the medical knowledge that we have today. Atharva Veda contains a corpus of works that talks about medical knowledge, and for example, Susruta Samhita, which is dated approximately 600 BCE, this one states that Ayurveda is an upanga of Atharva Veda. An upanga means it's like an appendix. It's a small portion of Ayurveda. It's like an appendix. Whereas another body of work called Charaka Samhita, around 200 BCE, states that Ayurveda has got enough to be a distinct Veda, like a fifth Veda in itself. And the third work over here by Vagbhatta, the 6th century current era, Ashtanga Hridaya, he says that Ayurveda is an Upaveda of Atharva Veda. And Upaveda means a significant portion. He says, so here you have three bodies of works that all claim that it came from the Atharva Veda, but one says that it is an appendix, other one says that it is a significant portion, and other one says yes, but we stand as a separate Veda by itself. Bottom line is that this is the center point, the source inspiration for most of these works, whether it is Susruta, Charaka, or Vagbhatta, taking the references from Dasgupta. If you look at Charaka Samhita, you might like to see how the traditional attrition of knowledge, what do we know? Where did it come from and what do we know about it? Charaka Samhita, like we said, Atharva Veda around 1000 BCE, this is a Western timeline. So around 600 BCE, a rishi called Punarvashu Atreya, he wrote something called the Bela Samhita. The Bela Samhita was contained again a lot of medical practices, rituals, and these kinds of things that would help in medical works. And his direct student was Agnivesha, who lived in the same time period. So he took his guru's works and he compiled them into a body of works, and we know about that. And somewhere around 200 BCE, this gentleman called Charaka, he came along and he made entire revision of all the works that existed at that point and made another corpus of works, which has come down to the present day. And we know that as Charaka Samhita. Now, in the year 400 current era, one more person called Dhridabala once again did a major revision of the Charaka Samhita. And in reality, this is what we have. We have some that refer to this, and some mostly what you're saying is Dhridabala's work. If you look at Charaka Samhita itself, you might be interested in knowing, so what was science like in those days? What is the medical knowledge and what did they talk about? So Charaka Samhita has got 120 chapters in 8 sthanas or 8 parts. And they talked, for example, 30 chapters, the Sutra section dealt with things like pharmacology, diet, diseases, their treatments, and how to have physicians as well as recognized quacks. So in those days itself, they had a genuine tradition and also a way of looking at people who weren't really genuine. 8 chapters in the Nidhana section dealing with the causes of the 8 main diseases, then dealing with things like taste, logic versus pathology and medical education, then embryology and anatomy and the connection between the body and the mind, and chapters devoted to diagnosis and prognosis, and also dealing with therapy, and finally some more chapters on pharmacy and devoted to general therapy. So this, as you can see, encoded a lot of scientific works and knowledge that was known in those days into a corpus of works which was used by medical students for a very, very long time. Now, I'd like to talk to you about something called the Boer manuscript. The Boer manuscript is something that was found in Turkmenistan, near the Chinese Xinjiang province, somewhere around the 1890s or so. And a British colonel called Boer, he came across this. We were not told how he came across it, but he got hold of it. And it became known as the Boer manuscript. This is the oldest manuscript that currently exists that has got Indian medicine. Everything else is a copy of a copy, and so on. So this is the oldest one, and here I got a scan of some of those things over there. It's a birch bark document, discovered in 1890. It contains some Prakrit in the Gupta Brahmi script, which linguistically has been put down to around 300 current era. Doesn't mean the knowledge is 300 current era, but was written down in that time frame. It contains a subset of the Charaka Samhita. It refers to the rishis Atreya, Harita, Parashara, Garga, Susruta, and Vashishta. But it also has the older Bela Samhita. It accepts 3 doshas, the Vata, Pitta, and the Kapha, but in some places also a 4th one, the Rakta, as one of the doshas. Now, a gentleman called Rudolf Hornell, he was a German who was the employee of the British India government, and he was an Indologist who studied many of these documents, and he made a translation of this in 1893. And here's a paper in the Royal Asiatic Society, I don't have the date over here, in 1910. So he wrote on what he called the Veda, I think it should be Bela Samhita and the Boer manuscript, as well as there is an entire book that he wrote about the Boer manuscript, about the translation and what he found. Google is a wonderful thing. If I could meet the guy who put all the Google books online, I would really shake his hand and kiss him on both cheeks, because it has been an invaluable addition to knowledge. So today you can go on Google and you can search for these things, download these books. Just about 15 years back, people like me would have had no access to this unless you went to Britain or United Kingdom, go to some old university there and dig through their archives and get it. But today you can go in your bedroom, sit there and Google and can get these things. It's a wonderful thing, really wonderful thing. So you can download this and read this yourself. So there's a question. How did Rudolf Horner and the Western Indologist date Susruta to 600 BCE, and how on earth did they date Charaka to 200 BCE? So I did some sleuthing on this and found that Hornell was the person who did that, and he's got a very nice book here called The Osteology, or the Study of the Bones of the Human Body. That was his background. And he wanted to see what was the knowledge of bones that was contained in the Susruta Samhita and the Charaka Samhita. That was his interest. And he wrote this book on that. That book has been reprinted by, I think, Amazon. You get his book today. So he said he studied the Vedic altars that are described in something called the Shatapatha Brahmana. The Shatapatha Brahmana is concerned with rituals on how do you do Vedic ritual, Vedic rites, how do you construct a Vedic altar, and what is the auspicious time to conduct a Vedic rite, and so on. But it does something interesting. It uses the bricks of the Vedic altar as a metaphor for the bones of the human body. And with that metaphor, it describes how you should construct a Vedic altar. For example, here is an altar which faces the east, and the bricks that are used to construct the altar would be based on the bones. So this gentleman, Rudolf Hornell, found that the bone structure described in the Shatapatha Brahmana has got knowledge of Susruta, Atreya, and Atharva Veda. But it does not show the deeper knowledge of bones that appear to have been in the Charaka Samhita. So based upon that, he said that Atharva Veda, Atreya, and Susruta are before the Shatapatha Brahmana, and Charaka should be after Shatapatha Brahmana. Mainly based on his knowledge of the bones that are described in Shatapatha Brahmana, he decided these dating structures. Then he went to his expert friends and asked, when can we date the Shatapatha Brahmana? And if you know, those are the days of Max Muller and other such wonderful gentlemen who used linguistic analysis and dated the Shatapatha Brahmana to about 500 BCE. And so he said, let's put Susruta 100 years before that. So Susruta came to 600 BCE. And he said, let's put Charaka to 200 BCE, allowing that much of time for deeper knowledge. And guess what? Knowledge to come from Greece into India about bone structure. And therefore, Charaka's knowledge of bones is much better. So these dates are pulled out of hat, bottom line. So if you have to critique this, we have to go and ask, is this true? Is that true? And what can we say about that? So I pose a question, what is the date of the Shatapatha Brahmana? Can we accept the date that we have? And one of my passions is astronomy, and I do a lot of astronomy and try to dig into the history of astronomy to see what's going on. And said, can we look at the astronomical observations contained in the Shatapatha Brahmana? I'd like to talk to you about a couple of phenomena that is very important for us to understand what I'm going to talk about now. If you were to take your DSLR camera, put it on a tripod, face it to the northern sky, hopefully after sunset, and leave it on a long exposure, after a few hours you'll see this. And this is the star trails. And this, over the center over here, is a Polaris, the star Polaris. It's a pole star that does not move in the sky. And all the stars around it go round and round the star. So this is the tilt of the Earth, and this is the rotation. Because of this rotation, you're seeing these star trails over here. Okay? So this star goes on this axis, this star on this axis, this one on the outer axis, and so on. So you can think that Earth's latitudes can be projected into the sky, and they become celestial coordinates. So Earth latitude becomes a celestial latitude. Earth's longitudes from the north to the south become celestial longitudes. So imagine that when I'm going to talk. In addition to this rotation, our Earth is doing one more cycle. And that cycle has a very slow wobble. It is like a spinning top. If you can imagine a spinning top, the top spins very, very fast. It's also got a very slow wobble sometimes. Our Earth is doing that. And that wobble is this thing it is doing over here. It is a 25,700 year cycle. Because it is wobbling so slowly, the pole star that it is pointing to can change with time, depending upon the time that you're interested in. So just keep this in mind when I talk about the rest of it. So there is a nakshatra. A nakshatra is a star in the night sky based on a certain division of the sky done by the ancient Indian astronomers. So Nilesh Nilkant Oak has been kind enough to call out these three things. I need some water. So he's been kind enough. He's been kind enough to call out these three verses from the Shatapada Brahmana that refers to the Kritika Nakshatra. The most interesting one is this chap over here, this one, 2.1.23. This one says, again, Kritika does not move away from the eastern quarter, whereas the other nakshatras move from the eastern quarter. Why was this important? The Shatapada Brahmana was concerned with saying, what is the eastern direction? Remember that if you had to do a Vedic ritual, you had to point east for maximum efficiency. If you did not point east, then the efficiency is not there. So they were greatly concerned with knowing where is the eastern direction. Now you might say, what's the big deal? Look where the sun's rising, that's east. But guess what? Because of the tilt of the earth, the sun does not appear exact east. It keeps going north and north and north. That's a solstice point. Then retracts, come to an equinox point, and goes to the southernmost point. That's another solstice. So you don't have a concept of a true east unless you know the equinox date and how to define things over there. So this one has got a clue. It says that Kritika does not move from the eastern quarter. So this decipherment of Kritika in Shatapada Brahmana was done in 1893 by two gentlemen. One is Tilak in 1893, other one is Dikshit in 1836. You also have people like Dr. Frawley as well as Dr. Subhash Kak, who have also interpreted this in recent times. This is a picture of Kritika that I've taken in a telescope. This shows you about 3 or 4 or 5 stars over here. This is how Kritika looks in the night sky. Now this is a picture that I've taken from my planetarium software. I hope you can see the circles from back there, these circles around here. So this is taken on March 20th, 2016, which is basically this year. And what I'd like to point out is this entity here is a Polaris star. And around Polaris, these circles are the celestial latitudes. Remember, you can take the Earth latitude, project it to the sky, and that becomes the celestial latitude. So you have, this is the 90 degrees, 80 degrees, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, and 0. 0 is the celestial equator. On the date of the equinox, the sun will be on the celestial equator. Every other time, the sun keeps moving northernmost point, coming north, till it reaches the solstice point, and retracts and goes south till it reaches the southern solstice point. But on the date of the equinox, it is on the equator, celestial equator. This is the 0 line. And on March 20th, our vernal equinox, what we find is Kritika is over here. This is the Kritika Nakshatra. This chap over here. And Kritika happens to be, this is 0 degrees, this is 10 degrees, this is 20 degrees, 25 degrees away. So Kritika is 25 degrees away in this year. If you go to the year 500, which is what Rudolf Hornell suggested, what you find is that on March 26, 500 BCE, if I simulate that date on my planetarium software, I get, when the sun is on the equator over here, you find Kritika over here, which is 10 degrees, 15 degrees away. 15 degrees is approximately 2 fists. When you take the fist and see the night sky, 2 fists away is where 15 degrees is. So that's quite a bit. So this can't be east, and no way in the year 500 you could have found out where the eastern horizon is. But if you go to 2982 BCE, April 15th, you find Kritika over here and the sun here. Remember, if you want to draw a line, you need 2 points. You need 2 points to draw a line. So early morning, the person observing the altar will see Kritika rise up in the eastern horizon, and after sunrise, the sun follows just over there, and they could align their altar exactly over there. So that is a point that you can make from here. I need some water. I don't know why my voice is breaking. So anyway, so at 8 o'clock in the morning on April 15, 2982, you have observed this phenomenon, which will help you to exactly figure out where the east is and know where the horizon is. So what is the bottom line? If we date Susruta and Charaka based on astronomy, the Kritika Nakshatra observation vernal equinox corresponds to 2982 BCE, based on astronomy. Just on one passage in the Shatapada Brahmana, we know that. Shatapada Brahmana, which mentions this, should be dated in that time frame, 2982. Based on the knowledge of bones that Dr. Hornell has suggested, Susruta and Punavasu Athreya should be before 2982 BCE, and Charaka should be after 2982 BCE. I don't know when after. At some point after, that's when it's got to be. But bottom line, that is the date that we propose. If some of you find this enormous timeline disconcerting, which I'm sure many of you do, because we have not been taught this at all, hey, what are we talking about? 3000 BCE? Wasn't that the Indus Valley time? Was it really the Vedic time? I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about these things. So I greatly advise you to go to our YouTube, on YouTube iHeart channel, and I have several videos over there that you might like to take a look and see what we have on this. So now I'd like to jump to ancient knowledge transfer from the period 3000 BC to 500 BCE. So I'd like to first talk about ancient climate change migrations. So what you see is this paper from Nature in 2014 talks that a 200-year drought cycle doomed the Indus Valley civilization. So the Indus dried up and people moved out. That's the reason for that dying out. This paper in 2016 talks more or less the same thing, but by looking at oxygen isotopes and so on, again a Nature paper, that says this is what caused climate change and decline of the Bronze Age Harappan civilization, which also includes the Saraswati Valley. Now, Professor Subhash Kar suggests that around 3000 to 1800 BCE, the gradual drying up of the Saraswati River led to an outward migration of the Vedic people out of the northern part of India, westward into West Asia. That was his thesis. Now, this paper in 2013 uses empty DNA from the early Bronze Age to the Roman period and suggests a genetic link between the Indian subcontinent and the Mesopotamian cradle of civilization. What this paper said was, when they analyzed certain skeletons found in that area, they found that up to Syria, there was genetic evidence of connection with the Indian subcontinent, but not beyond Syria. So if you postulated that Aryans came from outside India, there must have been a continuity of genetic material all over that area leading into India. But this is only up to Syria and no further. Clearly an evidence of going out of this region. Very interesting paper, but it points to what we want to say over here. So this is a world map from the time period 1400 BCE. And when you look at this world map, what you see is that mostly there are very, very simple peoples like hunter-gatherers, basically battle axe cultures and cultures in all over Europe and other places, same with Africa. You had some amount of civilization in Egypt, Mesopotamia, in India, and in China. So in the old world, those are the places where civilization was. If you look at this area of the world, it's expanded here, you find people called the Hatti people. The Hatti people in the Old Testament is referred to as Hittites. So we refer to them as Hittites today, but the real name is Hatti. Hittite is an anglicization of Hatti. So the Hatti people are here, the Mitanni people, the Kassites, and the Egyptians. Now, based upon Subhash Kar's thesis of drying up of Saraswati and westward migration around 1900 BCE, we find that there is evidence of Sanskrit-speaking people in this part of the world. For example, the Mitannis. The Mitannis are known to have spoken Sanskrit, and they're known to have had connections with Egypt. Egypt's periodization, all of us know about it, the old kingdom, middle kingdom, new and the late. I'd like to call your attention to the middle and the new kingdom, which is smack in the time frame of the migration. So if you look into evidence of ancient Egyptian medicine, you find that the earliest records on the papyrus, and there are the Smith papyrus, Ebers papyrus, and the Kahun papyrus, in the time frame 1800 BCE to 1500 BCE. Note that the Old Kingdom does not have evidence of medical practices the way the later kingdoms show. And this is smack down the period of time when we said that there's a migration out of the Indian area over here, and you find these things. The contents of these papyrus are magic, trauma, surgery, gynecology, and so on. And in this book, written by J.F. Roy, which you can again download from Google, it talks about the Antiquity of the Hindu medicine and the Materia Medica and Therapeutics, which is delivered at King's College. He points out that the plants and materials of India in use in Egypt hints at knowledge transfer from India. So he lists out in his book, in several pages, all of the herbs that were used in Egypt at that time and says that these are imported knowledge from India and they were also imported drugs from India in use in Egypt at that time. Go ahead and you can download this, look at this page 116 to 150. And we know that in those days, a lot of diseases were there in the old world, and because of that, there must have been a need for medical treatments. If you go to the Mitannis, the Hittites and the Kassites, again you have evidence. Admittedly, this is speculatory at this point, but there are some data points that seem to be very interesting over here. If you look at the Ayurvedic citation prayer, Ayurveda cites Brahma, the creator, as having the original knowledge, which he gave to the Ashwinis. The Ashwinis were the twins, and they got that knowledge from Brahma. Ashwinis gave it to Indra. Indra gave it to the rishi called Bharadwaj. Bharadwaj gave it to Punarvashavatreya, and from Punarvashavatreya it went to Charaka. That is a citation trial, if you will. Now the Mitannis are known to have invoked Indra, Varuna, and Ashwinis in all their battles in various times. So it's interesting that when one of the Egyptian pharaohs fell ill, the Mitannic king sent a healing statue, Shauka, which is Ishtar with a lion, or Durga, which is actually Shitala, deity of diseases, to help him cure that. If you look at the Hatti people, they suffered through a 20-year smallpox in 1322 BC, ending their civilization after. They used herbs, roots, mineral medicines, and spells. The female deity of healing is linked to Varuna, the Kamrusepa. And there's a statement that she trapped diseased women in a bronze pot and saves lives, which is very, very amazing because you can use a copper pot to store water and use it as a disinfectant. It's a very, very interesting observation in their records. If you look at the Babylonian Akkadian text from around 1000 BCE, it says rational examination and logic therapy should be used. Very, very similar to the Samkhya way of looking at the treatment. That is found in the Babylonian text. The Kassite Medical Archive from Nippur, the archive shows treatments based on herbal medicine and spells. So from that I'll jump, because I'm already told I'm running out of time, I'll go to 600 BC to current era. And this is perhaps the most important slide over here to show the transmission to the Greeks and the Romans. So Ayurveda had got this way of looking at the world with ether, earth, water, fire, and air, and the three pittas, which is pitta, doshas, vata, and the kapha. Three ways of looking at it. If you look at the Roman way, they were looking at it as hot, dry, cold, wet, and this division. So the humors that were used in Greece were similar to the so-called doshas or humors used in India. Very, very similar. Hippocrates, he proposed a system below, expanded by Galen. Hippocrates was a student of Democritus. There were Buddhist transmissions from 5th to 4th century BCE that went basically all over the place. Indo-Greek contacts from Alexander onwards in 330 BCE. We also know that Alexander ordered the translation of works for his uncle Aristotle. The Library of Alexandria in Egypt was set up primarily for east to west transmission. In India, if you look at 200 BCE, here were the Indo-Greek kingdoms and providing ample scope for exchange of information. If you look at this map over here, the Erythraean Sea in the 1st century, you find all over Western India ample ports which were trading with the Red Sea, going through the Red Sea, then a land route and into the Mediterranean areas. So it is not a surprise that even today Kerala is a place where there's a lot of Ayurveda because of the ancient practices from those days. Why did I talk about Democritus? Democritus is called the father of modern science. He's known to have traveled to Asia, India, Ethiopia, and returned to Greece with something called natural philosophy, where he talked about atomic structure, he talked about rational ways of looking at knowledge. But if you look at the 600 BCE sage called Kanada, who's the author of Vaisheshika Sutra, he says to understand Brahma through understanding natural world, you need to have a way of looking at the world, very rational examination, perception, and these kinds of things. The philosophy that he expounded was almost word for word expounded with Democritus in a later period of time, clearly pointing out to transfer of information. Democritus was the teacher for Hippocrates, and Hippocrates, we know, father of medicine over here. If you look at the transmission in early medieval time, this Greek physician, I can't pronounce her name, Dioscorides, in 50 to 70 current era, wrote a 5-volume Materia Medica, which has a large number of Indian herbs and recipe for drugs. This was used for 16 centuries in Europe. Spices, herbs, and medicinal drugs were part of the Roman trade with India. And that ended with Christianization of Rome in 330 current era. And it's amazing to note that immediately after Christian Europe rejected the old knowledge of Greece and India, they promptly went into Dark Ages and they started getting diseases and all of those kinds of things. It's an amazing coincidence or something just to ponder about. The Byzantine Emperor persecuted the Nestorians who denied the physical form of Christ, and he thought Christ is just a divinity. They thought they were divinities. So they persecuted them, and they fled to Kerala in around 489 current era and became the Syrian Christians. And they continued with transmission to Europe. Nestorians and Greeks also fled to a place called Jundishapur in Persia in 530 before the Muslims, and that was a center for Indian medicine and learning. And this Persian king Anushirwan in 531 sent his physician Borziev to India to get medical texts. And here is a picture of him in the Tehran courthouse. If you look eastward, there's a lot of information about how, through the Silk Route, Indian drugs went into China and to the rest of the world. I'm not going to talk about this. Then finally, 700 to the current era, to current times, transferred to Muslims in Europe. We know that Manka was an Indian physician in the court of Harun al-Rashid, 766 current era, after the fall of Sindh, and he translated Susruta Samhita to Persian. This work was used by Ibn Sena, also called Avicenna, in 1000 current era, whose medical texts formed the foundation of European medicine from 12th century. Another person called Al-Tabari, 850 current era, he wrote comparative works of Greek and Indian medicine. And Abd Allah Abin Ari, in 9th century, he translated Charaka Samhita to Arabic and Persian. That was transmitted from Baghdad all the way to Muslim Spain, Cordoba. Al-Kindi, he translated Greek and Indian works and wrote many works in math, medicine, astronomy, and so on. And this picture here shows you the Muslim world in the early part of this medieval period, how transmission was possible. On the Christian side of Spain, there were monasteries whose job was primarily to take the Arabic texts and translate them into Latin. And one name has come to us from the past, and that is Gerard of Cremona, who lived in approximately this time period. He translated 87 Arabic texts to Latin at Toledo on math, astronomy, and medicine. One more person, Constantine the African, who was a Christian monk in Italy, translated Arabic texts. So these form transmissions from the old world into Europe in this time frame. Colonial period is a body of works that shows absorption and digestion of Indian works into colonial medicine. There's a whole lot of them. I just picked out a few. There's Garcia de Horta. He was in Goa in 1537, Portuguese, and wrote this Portuguese text, I can't even pronounce it, on Ayurveda. And that was translated into Latin by a gentleman called Clusius. This is a cover of his book, Clusius, 1574 Latin translation. The Dutch botanist, Hendrik van Reed, he came to Malabar in Kerala and wrote his Hortus Malabaricus with the help of Ayurvedic physicians. Johann Koenig, he was a direct pupil of the very famous Carl Linnaeus, went to India as a physician, 1768, and he was a source for many of the works that Linnaeus did on botany. He also referred heavily to these two gentlemen. One more person, Bartholomew Ziegenbalg, who was a Dutch person who came to Tranquebar, southernmost point in India. He collected the Tamil medical works in 1712. I got it from this book. This is the Vataka Chuita. Johann Ernst Grundler in 1709 collected more Tamil medical books and wrote this German text called Malabarischer Medicus. Then this Britisher, William O'Shaughnessy in 1841, wrote Pharmacopoeia Indica in Bengal Dispensary. So these works form the corpus of knowledge that was used by Europe to absorb knowledge from India in those days in drugs, pharmacology, construction of drugs, herbology, therapy, and all of these techniques, and then use that for forming therapy and medical techniques in Western Europe. It is a very interesting point that medical colleges in India, that were there in Pondicherry, Madras, and Kolkata, they stopped teaching Ayurveda in the late 1800s. Till the late 1800s, Ayurveda was a core subject that was being taught. But somewhere around 1880 or so, they stopped teaching it. That is a point when digestion was complete and you had to kill off the old one. So that is a time when the old ways of teaching Ayurveda went into disfavor, and the Anglicization of the country went up tremendously around that point. My last slide, modern Ayurveda. So Ayurveda languished in a way as practiced by people who cared to practice about it, but the general population who widely took up Western medicines and homeopathy and so on. In 1971, a very good thing happened other than Indira Gandhi's liberation of Bangladesh. She set up something called Ayush. Ayush is Ayurveda, Yoga, Naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, and Homeopathy. A body was set up to protect the interests of traditional medicines, and 180 training centers were set up that offered degrees in Ayurveda. In 2013, there were almost 500,000 registered medical practitioners, 13,000 dispensaries, so many hospital beds, and so on, 209 undergraduate teaching organization institutions, and 16 PG bonds. The Center for Indian Industry in 2013 says the market in India is worth about 683 million, and export market is 72 million. Today, the tussle in India is between the purists and the modernists. The purists want to hold on to a traditional way of looking at Ayurveda and not have the influences of new techniques, whereas the modernists want to bring in new ways of looking at the world and so on. So this is the tussle that I'm talking about. Here's a very interesting paper from the year 2015. This talks about genome-wide analysis correlates Ayurveda Prakriti. Prakriti is the nature. So looking at the nature of a person, you make a therapy and diagnosis. So they're using genomic analysis of a person to try and assist in traditional Ayurvedic techniques to make diagnosis. So these are exciting times for Ayurveda because this is a fantastic instance where the government of India aids support to a traditional discipline, how it has rejuvenated the learning in that area. We've unfortunately not seen it in any other discipline like ancient math, ancient astronomy, ancient anything else, or ancient philosophy. Only in Ayurveda we have seen a rejuvenation of interest. These are very interesting times, like I said. So this is the end of my talk. I hope I've given you a nice perspective and overview from ancient, very ancient practices on the time.
Thank you, Dr. Raj Vedam. So this is an example of